Welcome and thank you for joining today's web conference, the VS Saul T. Wilson Jr. Internship Program Overview. Please note all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. At that time, I will provide you with instructions on how to ask a question over the phone. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during the Q&A. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If you require any technical assistance, send a note to the event producer or call our help desk at 888-796-6118. To adjust your view of the screen, use the magnifying glass icons at the top right corner of the content viewer. With that, I'll turn the call over to LaWanda Ammons, Director of Program Support Services, Management Support Division. LaWanda, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you for taking the time out of your schedules. I know with everything, all of the changes coming for us, I know that all of our schedules are really hectic, so really I just want to express my appreciation for you taking the time out to attend today's webinar. We have prepared an overview of our primary changes to the Saul T. Wilson Jr. Internship Program that will impact not only the students themselves, but supervisors, mentors, and the administrative staff that help us take care of our scholars. Next slide, please. As many of you are aware, or may not know, the Saul T. Wilson program was established in 1991 by a former BS employee, Dr. Saul T. Wilson. It is with deepest sympathy. Dr. Wilson just passed last Thursday on February 1st, and his services will be held in Tuskegee this Thursday. I did have the honor of drafting some language that Kevin Shea, our APHIS administrator, will be forwarding about Dr. Wilson, but I did want to share it with you because of his impact and importance to VS. Dr. Wilson had an extensive background in animal disease control and eradication, as well as administrating agricultural programs to the position of director. He had 25 years of service with both foreign and domestic animal health programs administered by the USDA. Dr. Wilson served as Assistant Deputy Administrator of the Program Planning and Development within Veterinary Services, APHIS, and he has received a number of awards and honors for accomplishments in administering animal health programs. In 1986, he was given the Presidential Rank Award for Meritorious Executive Service, the USDA's Distinguished Service and Superior Service Awards, along with a Certificate of Merit for Outstanding Leadership in eradicating African swine fever from the island of Hispaniola back in 1984. As I mentioned, because of Dr. Wilson's many accomplishments, we now have today's Saul T. Wilson Jr. Internship Program. To date, the scholars that we bring on board bring a wealth of skills and expertise to this effort. Since the program's inception, there have been a total of 65 scholars, in which there are currently 35 active scholars, in which 3 are former 1890 scholars, along with 26 permanent full-time employees that are still within the USDA APHIS family. There's information that, as I mentioned, this information will go out from Kevin Shea because of Dr. Wilson's impact across APHIS as a whole and not just to BS. Next slide. As I mentioned, to date there were 55 employees still employed with VS. There are 26, and between 2018 and 2021, as you can see, broken out by year, we have 35 employees plus 3 1890 scholars that will be permanently enrolled, brought on VS's role as permanent employees. Next slide, please. The way forward in restructuring and improving. As I mentioned, although the program, the Saul T. Wilson program, has been around since 1991, in meeting the changing needs of VS, managing onboarding of new hires, providing the support for our internships, as well as converting our scholars to permanent placement, a working group was formed based on those individuals you see on the screen, representatives from each of the business units, FIRST, NIS, STOS, and PSS, we were able to formulate a new overhaul program to meet today's demands as well as our changing workforce. Next slide, please. How are we going to get there? So what we did was, instead of identifying every single change that we will put forward in the new directive that is being circulated for approval, is that we felt that we would just pull out some of those highlighted or those helicopter view ones that are directly impacting the audience that's on the call today. For example, you can kind of ignore the document location, but you can use this as a reference once you get your new document. And one of the suggestions from the work group that we put forward is that currently the GPA is 2.0. What we wanted to do to make our program a little bit more competitive, because now FSI, for those that may or may not know, FSIS has a scholarship program also. So we wanted to be more competitive and be more aligned, not just with FSIS, but also to attract some of the best and brightest of students to be future VS employees. So we have requested the new GPA go from a 2.0 to a 2.5. Another change identifies previously that we would work directly with various VSET members, VS executive team members, for permanent placement. Well, sometimes that became a problem. There were things that would occur behind the scenes that may not necessarily be brought forward to our VSET members, and they are not aware. So we've streamlined that process, and now the VSET is more involved and engaged in placement with all of our scholars. There's a data call out now for those 10 scholars that are getting ready to graduate, in which they are determining final placement for those. Those suggestions or requests for those students will be brought back to the VSET, and I will be meeting with them at the end of the month for us to confirm and identify final placement. Once those suggestions have been brought forward, it is ultimately up to Dr. Scheer, VS Deputy Administrator, for final placement, and only Dr. Scheer has that authority. One of the things that we really need to make sure that we are not doing with our students that are graduating is communicating to them that they could be placed wherever they completed their internship. And what we really need to emphasize is that when that student accepted that Saul T. Wilson scholarship, they acknowledged that they could be placed anywhere within veterinary services, within APHIS, at any APHIS office based on the need at that time. And the reason we expanded it to APHIS is that there have been occasions where we did place a student outside of VS. For example, we had there was a time when a student actually went to animal care. And by opening it up to APHIS, it allows a little bit, it doesn't necessarily pigeonhole us to limit the locations, but to make the best of the investment for that student, because the last thing that we want to do at $15,000 a year is say, oh, well, we can't place you, then you can just take the money and then go, you don't have to repay those funds. So by opening it up to APHIS, it just avoids that opportunity. Another thing is that, another change is that we have established a maximum grade level for converting DMOs to be equal across the business units. And previously it was to be a scholar could only come on board at either 11 or 12 and then just be placed in 11 or 12 position. But what we wanted to do is to be more fair and offer permanent placement across VS based on the needs of the needs of VS at that time. So, for example, if a student that may have an MPH or an additional qualifying experience or additional education experience, they may be placed at a higher grade they can't be placed higher than a 12, but the position in which they are placed will support that. If, for example, if that position goes to a 13 or 14, that position supports why they were being placed there based on that experience or education. I hope that makes sense. Next slide, Lauren. Additional changes, like I mentioned previously, our scholarship amounts were $5,000 for undergraduate and $10,000 for graduate. And to be more competitive and be a little bit more up to date with today's rising tuition costs, we have increased a dollar amount to $7,500 for undergraduate and $15,000 for graduate studies. And although this change has already been in place, we are basically putting it in writing by updating the directive. Another change, previously all students were limited to 640 hours for work to be completed or performed during their internship. Dr. Scheer is very liberal and has completely removed the 640-hour limitation. So if there's a student that is working 700 hours over a period of various summers, and if they are working at if they're near their duty station because of school and they want to come and work during spring break or winter break, and their hours are 750, 800 hours, Dr. Scheer has removed the cap, and that all hours towards pathways towards pathways work study hours will be centrally funded and covered by the central fund for all of those salary hours. Another change is that previously students were awarded a $2,000 travel stipend over the course of their internship. What that $2,000 stipend during their entire internship, it is not per year, it is per student for their entire internship, is to cover chances to go to different parts of the state or different parts of the country to see what other work VS does. Or they could go to a port, or they could go to one of the service centers, or they could come to Riverdale to headquarters, or go to another office. Or I always like to say Florida, because Florida has almost all combined that they have a port, they have an animal import center, they have a local office, and then if you go to the northern panhandle side of the state, it's a whole different entity altogether as the type of work that they are completing. We were able to get that increase from $2,000 to $3,000 for the entire period of a student's internship to bring awareness of VS mission across the other business units. For example, another example is if a student is attending a conference or something like that. Whatever it is, to increase that student's awareness of VS, that is what those dollars are to be used for. We ask that you do work very closely with Lynn, because we do have to monitor and track that student's expenditures over the entire course of their internship, and we do highly encourage for supervisors to allow the flexibility for those students to travel to have those types of experiences. Another change is the relocation. Previously, there was not really much verbiage, just that the gaining business unit, there wasn't any verbiage, and now we are proposing the directive change that the gaining business unit will fund relocation expenses for permanent placement. What that says is that gaining office will work very closely with the lead AO for their respective business unit in conjunction with their ADA or ED, their Associate Deputy Administrator or their Executive Director, for offering relocation to be consistent within that business unit. For example, if a student is in Spurs, they may not necessarily have the same dollar amount as a student in NIES, but as long as you are consistent within that business unit and working very closely with the lead AOs to remain consistent within your business unit, we are able to offer relocation for. Okay. Next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Lynn Chambers, who is the actual program manager of the Saul T. Wilson program, and she will cover the next few slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. These are the timelines for the dates and the action, and this is more or less for the for you all to know what we do and the responsible parties and when we expect things to happen in which month. So you can tell in the month of October is when we try to ensure that all the new Saul Wilsons that we select in July and August are now fully on board. There's an onboarding package that has to go out, and we work very closely with the business units to get this thing up and running and for all of our new people to be on board that we have selected in the month of June and July. The next one down is November, and these are the notifications that we send out to the scholars, to all the scholars, for their transcripts of the previous semesters, to make sure they're in good standing, to make sure that their GPAs are in line, and And once again, PSS is in charge of that. We are the ones that send it out. Sometimes you may get a request from someone else. If you do, please send it back to us. We'll handle it for you. If you'll notice right down a little bit lower on the month of November, you'll see a conversion. And these are for the conversion students, the ones that will be graduating in the following May or June. This is a little bit different process. This is when I work very closely with LaWanda, the director, and have her notify the VSET of how many scholars we have that are potentially going to graduate in May and June. And she presents that to the VSET so everyone's on board that we have this many students. So, and the next month down is the month of December, and that's when we start reviewing the verbiage for our January announcements for the new Saul Wilsons for that particular year. Once again, right below that one, you'll see a conversion. So this is when I start asking the students, the ones that are going to be graduating in May and June, I'll start asking them to submit their updated resumes and their letters of interest. And what that does is it asks the students to kind of give them a brief. It's like a salesmanship. It kind of tells them what they want to do, what they've done, how they've, the business units have participated in their growing experience. So with those being said, that's what we usually do. This is PSS's responsibility. So during the month of December. In the month of January, we try to keep two balls up in the air. So we submit the SF-52s for the actions of the now announced Saul Wilsons for the undergrad, the 4.5s, and for the graduate schools of the 7.9s. And once again, PSS is responsible for that now. As a matter of fact, it just opened yesterday, February 5th, and it closes on February 9th. The next part down is the conversion, and once again, that's for us. And we send out for management, we need this information for the conversion. We actually send out to the conversion managers a survey monkey. It's a survey asking for particular information about the student. It gives the VSET some more information that they probably wouldn't have from the letters of interest and from their resumes of these converting students. With that being said, we put together a spreadsheet with these letters of interest and their resume and the Survey Monkey responses back from the managers, and we submit that to the VSET. And including in that sometime the information from for their permanent placement will happen sometime from the month of January through February. Next slide, please. So you can see in February, February is mostly dedicated to the conversion process itself, mainly because the vacancy announcements for the Saul Wilsons advertised for the 2018 is already out. So we really don't have anything with that plan just yet until we receive that package back from Human Resources. So you can see in the month of February for the conversion, you have the Deputy Administrator's approved spreadsheet with the scholars in placement. Once they're placed, then that's when we really start coordinating with the lead AOs for the final placements and the conversions of the scholars, and the lead AOs will contact their administrative people as well for asking for information that will be necessary for this conversion. And what we do in PSS, we make the offer letters to the students, and we propose the locations, the GS level. We also give information on, this is how much money we have paid for your tuition. This is how many years you've been working for VS. And the prepared letters that we send out are directed to those students, and we give them a bit of time for them to make the decision whether they A, want to go to the location, and B, or they can decline, and then there's another step that involves in that if they do decline. So let's move on to the month of March. The month of March is strictly for, by then we have the package of the HR packages back, and that's when we start doing, before we can offer them any positions, we have to do security and background checks, which is extremely fast for the people that we have to have this information. We have to contact the students. We have to get them fingerprinted and things of that nature. Once again, once we receive the certificates, we have necessary information that we need back from them, such as the letters of recommendation and the essays that we need to do for them to get ranked. And from our ranking panel, there's actually a ranking panel that does the Saul Wilsons for the next processing class. So in the month of April, we have, we submit the panel scores and things of that to the director, and we finalize who is going to be offered these positions. And then we work with the AOs and the receiving offices, and we ensure that the certificates are, just like any ordinary vacancy announcement package, we ensure these certificates are returned to HR prior to their expiration dates. And then we go back to the conversions in the month of April, and there's where if a graduate happens to decline what we've offered, then there's a reimbursement process, and we work very closely with the financial management division to make a collection on that, and we inform everyone that this person has declined. So next slide, please. So in the month of May is mostly the graduation classes. This is our conversion classes, and we do some monitoring and to ensure that these scholars are on schedule for their conversion within the required 120 days after graduation that they graduate. This 180 days when they graduate is my starting time to make sure that these people are on board and they passed all their background checks, they have their system, they've had their mandatory training, and all their 640 hours are completed, and all that has to be done before they graduate. Then I work in that 120 days, I work with HR to make sure that that all their necessary requests under the Pathways program has been met. So, and in June we do the request for the current scholars to submit transcripts. Once again, we have to have transcripts twice a year, once in the fall and once in the spring, to make sure that they're still in good standing, and these are for our current scholars. And then in the months of June and August and September, that's when we collaborate with the HR and our administrative officers on facilitating the new scholars that we've just picked out in the month of May and June, that we've elected them, and they've gotten all their necessary paperwork, and then we start all over. So next slide, please. And I'll turn it back over. No, this is our conversion process. I'm sorry. The conversion process is kind of laid out. There's a form that goes out to the administrative officers that have conversion students. For the gaining office, you have to have a position description for this particular employee for that targeted grade level and position. An IDP has to be completed somewhere in, for this particular year. Regular employees get it. The students have to get one as well. A copy of the intern's completed training certificates. That's through the AgLearn. You can get with your AgLearn coordinator and pull those certs and make sure that the students have met their 40 hours. There's a certification from the timekeepers that they've met all their required hours, which is 640 hours. We have to have official transcripts before this conversion can happen. Now that's in a way a sticking point. I have accepted letters from the department because sometimes official transcripts are a month away from when the student graduated, so that's affecting and backing me up into my 120 days. So sometimes I can use a certificate as well. The mentoring agreement, there we go. The mentoring agreement is, we have that. We have it on with us. We'll send it to you. The most recent copy of the intern's performance appraisal, you all should have that. The favorable recommendation from the intern's current supervisor is probably what we've used under the SurveyMonkey. We've also requested it if there's something that they wanted more to say. And the copy of the original Pathways Agreement is what we have, and we have it on with us, so we can actually, once again, send that to the AOs as well. So that more or less is the conversion process in a nutshell, no doubt. So next slide, please. And I'll turn this back over to LaWanda Amos, and thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. As you can see that we did back in November cover all of VS's student programs in a webinar, and we did record that webinar, so it can be found by accessing our VS National Recruitment Program website. And hopefully everyone in attendance did receive my email, in which they can actually click onto that link directly from the PowerPoint presentation. And the biggest thing on this particular slide is that a report will be provided to Dr. Scheer of all managers and administrative staff. During the presentation, there were 59. I see we lost someone, but we will receive a report of all attendees that individually but what I will need is that if there are individuals that are multiple or grouped together at one particular location or sharing a screen, if you could please send your name to Lynn Chambers so that your name can be added to that report, so that you can get credit for attending today's webinar, and that your name will go on the list as being in compliance with Dr. Scheer's request, because this was very highly, as I do my air quotes, highly encouraged, parentheses, mandatory, for all of the target audience to attend. And the last slide, Lauren. And this is where we give you guys a chance to tell us, or a chance to talk. So if there are any questions, feel free to either, as Lauren indicated earlier, complete those steps, or put it in the chat box, or however whichever way you prefer. So Lauren, I'll turn it over to you to facilitate this portion of the call. And as you can see, here are the representatives and members of the VS Recruitment Program. Karen Martin is the supervisor / program coordinator. Deirdre Nebu manages our Daniel Salmon, Tribal Nation, and 1890 Scholars Program. Lynn Chambers manages our Salty Wilson Junior Internship Program, which was today's call. And Pam McDonough manages paying all of what we previously discussed, those 35 scholars. Pam manages paying the tuition for each of those scholars on either quarter or semester basis based on the institution's process. And she also covers the tuition for the Daniel Salmon Tribal and the Tribal Nation scholars. So she pays about, I want to say almost 50, I think it's more like 42, I believe, scholars on a semi-annual basis for completing the documentation and paperwork so that they can be successfully converted to full-time VS employees. And with that, Lauren, I'll turn it over to you to facilitate the Q&A portion.
Please feel free to place yourself into the question queue by dialing #2 on your telephone keypad. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. Alternatively, you may submit a written question using the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and choosing all panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. And we have had a few questions that came in over the course of the presentation, so I'll start with what we have. First, is there a plan to grandfather in current scholars if necessary if they do not currently have a 2.0 GPA?
Great question. And if they are already a scholar, they are already in the program, the new requirement for the 2.5 is for the announcement that is out right now. And thank you for that reminder. I forgot to say that the Salty Wilson announcement is currently on USA Jobs, and it is only for the new students. So if they are already a scholar, they have already met the requirement at that time, and the 2.5 is for new students moving forward, effective with the new group that we will bring on board this year.
So a question related to the training increase, when is that effective? If a student is currently in the program, do they get the increased $1,000 to $3,000, or is that only for new selectees?
That is for all Saul Wilson scholars. The increase, the $3,000 will cover all scholars, new and old.
Let's see. Most recent copy of the performance appraisal, because most students are less with us for 90 days at a time, we cannot put a formal AD 435 in place. Is there a standardized informal performance rating tool for these students?
We encourage when a student is placed with an office, the intent is for that student to be at that office throughout their entire internship. Because we do not provide housing for the Saul Wilson Scholars, it's very rare that they are moved. So when they are placed with you, a supervisor is encouraged to put a performance plan in place to meet that requirement.
And then next we have, please clarify the statement that was made that the Saul T. Wilson Scholars are eligible to be placed in GS-12 level positions. Can they be placed in a GS-12/13 position, such as epidemiology officer position?
So, for example, if a scholar is upon graduation, scholars are eligible because of the DVM component. They are eligible to be placed in at least a GS-12. If and gaining office, for example, if there's a student that has an epidemiology background, they took extra courses, or whatever the case may be to support that, yes, they can be placed in a GS-12/13 or a GS-12/13/14 position. It could start as low as an 11 and go as high as a 14. So the answer is yes, they can. It's just based on the needs of VS at the time of graduation, and if they have identified based on their resume or extra courses, or possibly even where they were placed during their internship for the epidemiology position. So yes.
Were there any current or former S.T. Wilson Scholars permitted to be on this working group or to give input into changes?
There were a few scholars that provided input but were not formal members of the work group.
All right, and we do have a question in queue now. As a reminder, dial #2 if you would like to ask a question over the phone, or you may send in a note using the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and sending your note to all panelists. All right, caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Brianna Scher, and I just want to say thank you to both Luanda and Lynn. This was really great. I have two questions. You guys knew I would have questions, I'm sure. That was actually my question about the AD 435s and the performance appraisals, and I just want to make sure that we're doing this right, because I feel like, at least myself personally, I've been pretty confused over the years. I understand they'll be placed with our office, for their whole 4 years. And we've got several in our unit, but they're on leave without pay for the majority of the year, and then they may only be in work status for 60 days in the summer and then 60 days the next summer. And it was my understanding that we couldn't legally do an AD 435 that would become part of their personnel record if it wasn't a minimum of a 90-day rating period. So we've used that performance plan tool almost as an exercise, if you will, to practice putting one in place, setting clear expectations, and then providing informal feedback and evaluation at the end of the 60 days at the end of the summer that we may be done with them. But I call it informal because it kind of just stays in-house. It doesn't become part of their personnel record. And so does that meet your guys' expectation, or should we be doing something different?
Thank you. Great question, Brianna. And I love the fact that you have questions, so thank you. It's no problem at all. And to answer your question, yes, that will meet our requirement for having that information. The performance appraisal, it sort of stays in-house for us to make sure that we do have some type of formal record directly from the supervisor that is on, sort of like the AD form, not necessarily just the Survey Monkey, which is sort of an informal document that we created. But to answer your question, yes, that does meet the requirement for us as far as providing that feedback from the supervisor.
Okay, thank you. And I've got one more question for you, Luanda.
Go ahead.
I apologize if I missed this at the beginning, and I understand the VSET controls everything for placement of these scholars, But as far as the selection, it's been a number of years, but there used to be a panel that was composed of previous scholars and some other folks that did that selection. Is that handled at the VSET level at this point or in PSS, or is there a call for some input on the selection, either resume or interviews, or I don't even know how that works at this point?
No, great question, Brianna, and it is something that we can definitely share so that everyone is aware of the process. We still use that panel, and we try to get members of BMOs that can, have the time to help us rate the applicants, and we always try to get at least one former scholar to participate on the panel, so it's at least, and it's an odd number, it's usually 3 ranking panel members to go through the application packages to give us the score, to make sure that the students are meeting different competencies and needs to see, not necessarily, we don't necessarily, and then that they are placed in the ranking order. But it's just a matter of sometimes people will just approach me, hey, Luana, I'm interested. I heard you were looking for a panelist, or is it that time of year? I would like to throw my name in the hat if you need some help or something like that. So it's not that we don't ever, we just never have the need to send out a formal data call to call for individuals to participate as panelists, because people just are always volunteering, whether they're here in Riverdale, in Fort Collins, or across the any of the offices.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course, you're welcome. Thank you. Great question.
Okay. We do have a couple more questions that have come in through the chat.
Okay.
When will the new directive be complete?
The new directive is with the WORD group, the Writing Outreach Regulatory Division, and it is being circulated amongst the VSEC, our various executive team members, to go through each business unit to provide any questions or clarifying data. And I don't know their process, but it is with them, and it's just a matter of them getting it finalized so that we can get it to Dr. Scheer and get it signed. And as soon as it is signed, I will be sending out a BSall message with that directive attached.
All right. The next question, can supervisors who don't have a 2018 conversion-eligible student be provided with the SurveyMonkey questions in advance so that they know what they'll be asked to provide while they're working with the student?
Well, what we can do is provide you a copy of what we used this year. It was sort of a last-minute scramble to get the SurveyMonkey, but just so that everyone is aware, it's just some of the basic questions out of the PD. Lynn, if you can pull the question up, if you can pull that SurveyMonkey up, we can read a couple of the questions so that they're aware. But it's not more than, I think it's no more than 10 questions. And that supervisor will identify which scholar that they're submitting the information from and that current duty, location, and business unit. But it's really some of the duties that's in the PD, and then there's 2 or 3 questions in which we're asking for specific feedback on a student. But Lynn, were you able to pull it up to read a couple of those questions?
I'm pulling it now.
Okay, all right, great. But it's definitely related to that student and their performance and language directly out of the PD. It was really easy. We tried to make it as easy and just click from, I think it's somewhat agree, somewhat disagree, neutral, somewhat agree, and then agree. So, I mean, it's really quick, clicking in, filling in the different blocks, and then the 3 questions at the end to provide specific feedback from that supervisor in their own language as to the performance level of that employee. And we really want the supervisors to be honest with us. If we feel that a student, and not just wait when it's time to graduate, if at any time there's a problem with a student, please bring it to Lynn and myself, or Lynn or myself, whichever you feel more comfortable with, because that is something we definitely need to address when it comes to that student. For example, if a student is in academic trouble, we'll see that information before you will, because unless they're, based on your relationship with that student, they let you know. But when before we make a payment, Pam makes sure that that student is in good academic standing. And if that student is not in good academic standing, they are immediately placed on probation and have 1 semester to get their grades back up. And especially with raising that GPA from a 2.0 to a 2.5, we have to stress and emphasize how important it is to for that student to meet their responsibility of keeping their grades up to receive that $7,500 or that $15,000 on an annual basis.
Wanda, I have those questions.
Okay, if you can read just a couple of them to give our audience an idea of the questions, and then we'll make sure that we still forward out those. We will forward out the questions from this year's SurveyMonkey.
Okay. One of the questions was, the student has experienced following scientific protocols, procedures, and or plans to conduct scientific experiments in a laboratory and or field setting. And that was agree, strongly agree, neutral, highly agree, things of that sort. Another one that comes to mind is one of the survey questions is, please describe what this person is doing well as a Saul Wilson Scholar. And that gives the manager some writing to do. Another question in the survey for an essay would be, what area is the scholar the strongest and what area needs additional training? So there's actually 13 questions on this, and the first 10 are agree, strongly agree. So that's what that is. And I have those, and I'll send those out.
Perfect. Thanks, Lynn. And thank you. I can't remember who asked for that, so thanks.
Are we ready for the next question?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Once the student is notified of where they will be placed, it appears the only choice they have is to accept or decline that specific position. Will they have an opportunity to ask for another position?
It depends. So I don't have the authority to answer that question based on the need for VS. Now that the data call is out and the VSET members are looking at this current graduating class, it depends on how many locations are available to offer the students an opportunity. So as it stands right now, from what I am getting from the VSET, there's only one location. But that does not mean that a student can't say, well, based on the information that they put in their letter of interest, the VSET won't try to take into consideration where they would like to go and try to get them placed as close as possible. So to answer the question, I honestly don't know what we will have available based on the needs of placement when the students graduate. I know that doesn't really answer the question. I don't have an answer to the question, unfortunately. But I will know more once I meet with them at the end of the month when we're looking at placement for the students.
If a student is still enrolled in the program but has moved on to veterinary clinics after completing their hours, are we expected to obtain an updated IDP for them?
I don't understand the question. When you say, I'm sorry, can you read it again, Lauren? You said when a student?
If a student is still enrolled in the program but has moved on to veterinary clinics after completing their hours, are we expected to obtain an updated IDP for them? I'm going to try to guess what this person is saying, is that a student has participated as a Saul Wilson Scholar for a couple of years, and during their junior and senior year, they have to complete vet clinic rotation, so to speak. But before, it's not necessarily automatic that they do that. They have to communicate that with the supervisor to obtain approval. Even though we understand and we really try to work with that student, we still have to not necessarily maintain our IDP, but we still have to make sure that we are in communication with what that student is doing for that particular summer and making sure that they are still meeting the requirements so that when they complete their clinics and then they truly complete the program being a Saul Wilson Scholar, that everything is in place for a successful conversion. So I hope that answers the question that I think that they were trying to ask. Our next question. Will the scholars only be placed in existing vacancies for their permanent duty stations, or will positions be created for them?
It will depend on what the VSET feels will be best at the end of, when I meet with them at the end of the month. I don't necessarily know that duty locations will be, I don't necessarily want to say created, because based on our recent hiring freeze, I anticipate that there are a lot of VMO vacancies across VS as a whole. So hopefully they will be just, going into one of those slots, but ultimately it will be up to the VSET to identify which locations and which students that they would like to bring within their respective business unit for that slot to be filled.
One of our Saul Wilson scholars worked primarily with NIES and had little exposure to SPRS. The SurveyMonkey questions didn't seem to really cover the duties she performed while she was with us. Can the questions be more geared to the primary work unit for future surveys? It was difficult to adequately answer the questions when the student did not perform the activities that were outlined in the question.
That is great feedback to know. We pulled those questions based on the duties in the PD, in which that PD was, it was one of the all VS VMO PD, student trainee PDs. So we can definitely take that into consideration for next year. So thank you for that feedback. Absolutely.
Can SF52 instructions be included in the new directive? It was a bit confusing in the past.
Absolutely. And so, Lauren, if you can pull up the last slide or the attachment slide. In that, as you can see in that particular slide, we are showing, it says, it gives you guidance as to who prepares the 52 for all of the student programs in which VS supports, whether it's a Saul Wilson scholar, a Daniel Salmon scholar, Tribal Nation, 1890, et cetera. It lets you know who our program coordinator is here within the PSS as well as outside. And then the third column identifies who prepares the 52 for those respective programs. So for this one, when it comes to the Saul Wilson internship, Lynn is the one who will prepare the 52 for announcing the program and working with the lead AO for the business unit for successful conversion and placement once the scholar has graduated. So I hope this slide is helpful to identify who does what, as well as what is offered coming from the salary, the funding source. For example, if you go down to the VS Summer Intern Program, I was very happy to know that Dr. Scheer did approve all 39 requests for our Summer Internship Program this year, and all of that is centrally funded. That does cover housing, travel to and from the duty station, as well as salary. And then the business unit will prepare that 52, et cetera. Although it is not a scholarship program, it is a very competitive opportunity for students that are interested in coming to work for us for that summer. So I hope this is helpful with addressing that 52 question.
Regarding the change in the 640-hour requirement, does that remove 640 hours being the requirement of minimum hours prior to graduation?
No, it does not. A student must complete 640 hours as a minimum. What it does is remove it as a maximum. The student must complete 640 hours. And I want to reiterate the must complete, because Dr. Scheer was very clear in minimal engagement with approving a waiver for students, because if a student is an outstanding scholar, just a really outstanding student, et cetera, there's an opportunity for up to 320 hours to be waived. Dr. Scheer is not a proponent or an advocate for that, because he feels that if we are investing almost $15,000 into a student, that student should work at least 640 hours for us to receive those funds, and more importantly, gain the experience that VS has and is offering as a Saul Wilson scholar. So no to the 640-hour minimum, but it does remove it as a maximum. Great question. Thank you.
Has consideration been given to placing students sooner in the year so there are more positions available?
I don't understand the question. I'm so sorry. Can you read it again, and I can try to guess what's missing? Can you read it again, Lauren?
Has consideration been given to placing students sooner in the year so there are more positions available?
I'm guessing sooner in the year is for the students for conversion as opposed to students when they are originally brought on board. So I'm really going to try to focus on the students for conversion. And we are in the process, according to our new timeline, we're right on time with placing them, whereas last year, given a hybrid of different reasons, we were very late in placing our scholars last year. But based on our new timeline and working with the Saul Wilson Working Group and working with Lynn as the program manager and myself, we are right on time with placing the students. We would like to be a little bit earlier, but we are meeting our timeline placement for the students. That way that our goal is to let the students know by the first week of March where they will be placed. That way they'll know definitely almost up to 3 months prior to graduation. So I'm hoping that was the question in regards to the student that we are converting for placement.
Right. Would the students still get to provide their location preference even with the new change with Dr. Scheer being the only one authorized to place the students?
So the student's letter of interest is a request. It is not, if a student, for example, a student says, I want to be placed in California, it has never been the VS's process to place them in California. We could possibly try to get them close to California, but it has always been based on the needs of VS at the time of that student's graduation. But ultimately, Dr. Scheer will be the final authority to support the suggestions from the respective BSET members to say that, for example, out of the 10 students, if SPURS wants to, bring 3 of them on board in various field locations, then, ultimately it will be up to Dr. Scheer to say yay or nay in moving with those placements.
And we actually just got a response about the previous question. She says, yes, I'm talking about students for conversions. That is feedback I had from a former scholar. They would like to know earlier, if possible, where they would be placed.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
That is definitely the plan for us to move forward with getting the notifications to the students late February, early March at the latest, and that definitely gives them at least 3 months before their graduation date, 2 to 3 months before their graduation date, and we're really trying to push it back to February, early February versus the end of February. But if you work with the VSET, if another priority comes along, this, it sort of just gets pushed back. But I really try to stay in front of them when it comes to placement of our scholars so we can definitely stay on board for notification. So, yes, that is the plan, and thank you.
And I'm looking at the clock. We've got about 5 minutes left and 4 more questions in the queue. So I will move to the next question. Will the DA take into consideration a Saul T. Wilson scholar's family situation, such as difficulty for a spouse to give up a good job in the local area where the scholar attended veterinary medical school when determining where to place the student?
Hopefully that student put that in their letter of interest to explain that, and that will be taken into consideration on a case-by-case basis. But once again, I will go back to the documentation that that student signed upon accepting the scholarship, that they will be placed wherever, VS has the priority and the luxury of placing them wherever we would need for them to go upon graduation.
All right. Next, is a new IDP required each year?
It's not necessarily a new IDP, but a student is the same as a permanent employee, so it may just be a matter of updating an IDP, but the students must follow the same guidance as permanent full-time employees.
Are annual leave or holiday hours included in the hours counted towards the 640-hour minimum required to be worked?
Great question, and no, it is not. It is actual time worked. Actual time that a student reports to duty. The exception to that may be holiday hours, but annual leave does not count. We can definitely send out a follow-up. I can't remember right off about the holiday hours, but annual leave, the answer is no. Annual leave or sick leave hours do not count.
All right. And finally, what will happen if the student fails to complete their 640-hour minimum requirement, especially those awarded the scholarship as a second-year student? Would they automatically fall into the category of having to reimburse the agency?
We work really closely with that office in the hopes that that student does not fall below the 640, in which there may be opportunities that we could work with that student during the school year to match them up with another office closer to either their institution, in which that they, if their school schedule allows, that they could be afforded the opportunity to make sure that they do meet the 640-hour minimum. That's when Lynn and that respective office are working really closely and on an annual basis to make sure that that does not occur.
All right. And that is all the questions we have.
All right, great. So thank you to everyone, again, for taking the time out for attending today's webinar. As I mentioned, if you have any questions at any time, not just about the Saul Wilson Scholar, but any of VS's other scholarship programs or our summer intern program, please feel free to reach out to any member of the individuals on that last slide, the program contact slide. If you can put that one back up real quick, Lauren, for me. And then, yes, thank you. Feel free to reach out to any members of those individuals according to the various titles and programs that they each respectively manage. And as always, you know that you can definitely either shoot me an email or give me a call. I'll be more than happy to assist you. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact any of those individuals or myself as well. I wish you all a wonderful day, and I look forward to our placement of our scholars in a few weeks. Okay? Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Lauren, for facilitating today's call.
No problem. Thank you to all for joining today's conference. This event has concluded, and you may now disconnect.